Hey everybody, Rob Maurer here, and I just wanted to do a quick check-in episode today. As those of you that follow me on Twitter know, I have been sick this weekend. I started getting sick on Thursday evening, that progressed Friday, developed a fever actually Friday night, even though when I posted on Twitter about it at the time, I didn't have one. In terms of other concerning symptoms around, potentially CV-19, I haven't had any cough. My throat has been swollen and sore, but not from a scratchy or dry perspective. I've coughed probably twice all weekend, which would be, I would say, a normal rate. I'm starting to recover, get some more energy, but been pretty run down this weekend, so I'm still catching up on a lot of what's going on and doing my best here, but bear with me as I do continue to get caught up over the next few days. And I am just trying to, from a personal perspective, take things as easy as I can. This has been pretty stressful to cover, and I'm trying to minimize all that and fully recover so that I can, do a good job of keeping everybody updated as we all work through this together. Second thought along those lines, I just want to say a huge thank you to anybody that's working in healthcare right now. This has got to be extremely difficult, this period of time, and just know that I'm sure I speak collectively when I can say that your contributions during this period of time and all the time do not go unnoticed and are extremely appreciated. So I wanted to put that out there. Getting into specific, Tesla macroeconomic stuff. Obviously today was a terrible day for the stock market. This was the worst day for the Nasdaq in its entire history, which is shocking, but its entire history. Finishing down 12.3%. Tesla, obviously, terrible day as well, down 18.6%. But putting that into a longer term perspective, the Nasdaq was at these levels back in January of 2019. So even with the really steep declines that we have seen, it's coming off of a really steep increase that we've seen over the last 12 months or so, 13 months, 14 months, whatever the case may be. So hopefully that helps make these drops a little bit more palatable. And, in the case of Tesla, I think we're at $455 per share today. Tesla was actually at those levels this January, so only a couple months ago. So I think that makes it a lot more tolerable. But at the same time, we still have a lot of room to fall, even with the macro environment. And as I continue to say, I think we're going to continue to see more of these lockdown efforts. Just today we had the Canadian border closed to non-essential travel. Colombia closed their borders. We're seeing continued lockdowns with the Netherlands shutting down restaurants, bars, things like that. Switzerland banning all events until April 19th. France banning all family and social gatherings. And then in the United States, we're seeing pretty strict lockdown efforts being enforced in places like San Francisco, New York City. So New York City is closing all schools on Wednesday, and like many other places, closing bars, restaurants, and things like that for non-delivery services. Same thing in Minnesota, Illinois, Ohio. From a state perspective, probably others that I haven't seen as well. But I think these lockdown efforts continue to intensify. We've seen just over the course of the last week, sort of the guidance in terms of public events go from, no more than 500 people down to no more than 250 people. Now the CDC, I think over the weekend, said no more than 50 people at any public events. And now the White House today recommending that no more than 10 people at any public event. So I think this is just going to continue until we see some sort of decline in new cases, some sort of curb to this exponential growth rate that we've seen in other countries. And we have seen progress there in other countries, and hopefully the United States, with some of these lockdown efforts, can start to make progress on that and limit the spread of this and flatten that curve out, which we talked about a little bit last week. So anyway, my point here is there's still a lot of downside. Personally, I sold about 10% of my Tesla stake today, again, just to sort of de-risk and have cash in reserve should I need it, or should there be, better buying opportunities in the future. My perspective is it's going to continue to get worse until it gets better, but we'll just have to see on that. Obviously, today was pretty tough. So anyway, let's move on from that. The other news that we got over the weekend was the Federal Reserve doing its second emergency rate cut in, the last week, maybe week and a half. So they cut interest rates by a full point. I believe this is the largest rate cut in history, or at least the largest since the Great Recession of 2008. So interest rates are now near zero. The federal rate is in between 0.0% and 0.25%. So again, the lowest levels there since 2008, and obviously doesn't leave many levers in terms of further action on just interest rates. You can go to negative interest rates, which if we get in a situation like that, we can definitely discuss more in detail. One of the other things I want to talk about more specifically was the San Francisco lockdown. We have heard reports that essentially all non-essential businesses in San Francisco must close. And apparently Tesla is not impacted by this yet. This is sort of early reporting. But I believe Russ Mitchell of the LA Times is reporting that he was on a phone call with someone that read an email that was sent to Tesla employees that Tesla was granted essential status, allowing them to continue to operate. So I think we'll learn more probably about this tomorrow. But that threat does still exist because, again, we continue to see lockdown efforts intensify. But as of right now, it looks like Tesla is still clear to operate despite this lockdown happening in San Francisco. So that's kind of the most Tesla-specific news. Obviously, we've got Model Y deliveries happening. We had a tweet from Tesla, I believe, over the weekend or on Friday, that they actually produced 4 megawatts of solar roof, which they said was equivalent to about 1,000 roofs. So that would be, 4 kilowatts per roof, which is a really good production rate. That would be, we'll do probably the math on this later this week in a more specific episode, but that would be, more than $1 billion in revenue from a run rate perspective annually. So really good production from solar roof, especially, in this sort of economic climate right now. And obviously this is part of the ramp up. So over time that can point to things being much stronger than that. So really exciting progress there with the solar roof. Obviously exciting progress with the Model Y, but Tesla down 19%. Just like all other stocks, Tesla is at the whim of the macro environment right now. So that's why we're going to continue to focus heavily on what's going on there. So as I said, kind of it for Tesla news. In terms of just the macro environment, a couple more things that I wanted to mention here. I think Elon was tweeting a little bit about this today. There have been some reports about some potential progress in terms of treatment, in terms of what's been going on here. My perspective on this is it seems like this information has been out there for a while. There are studies going back to February that sort of mention what I'm about to talk about in terms of treatment. So I'm not sure that anything here is really news, more so it seems to just be more broadly discussed now. So I guess let me go through it. So there are a couple of different drugs that have been shown to potentially have the ability to inhibit the virus to some extent. And even me saying that it has been shown is probably an overstatement. Those couple of drugs, at least that I'm seeing out there, are chloroquine, which has in general antiviral properties. So that has been shown in vitro, which means in test tubes, to have some, inhibiting properties against CV-19. But in terms of in vivo testing, which is actually in organism testing, which is a much more difficult bar to achieve, the testing has been extremely limited, and the actual data from that testing is severely limited, even more so. So it may be helpful, but we don't necessarily know that yet. The other one that I've seen mentioned is Remdesivir. I haven't done as much research on that one, but apparently both of these things may be showing a little bit of signs of at least offering some form of treatment. And there was also the first vaccination test on a person today conducted in Seattle. So I think that's also a good sign. Overall, the point here is that as time goes by, we get more time to work on treatments, work on vaccinations, things like that. And that is alongside with medical capacity and healthcare capacity, one of the huge advantages to the social distancing policy, allowing us to flatten that curve a little bit, like we talked about last week. So as that curve gets flatter and we have the distribution of cases happens over a greater period of time, it just allows for more time to find treatment, to find vaccinations, and things like that. So a really helpful move there. But overall, I think we just continue to be in this state of uncertainty. And I think the questions that we talked about, weeks ago, probably at this point, we don't really have answers to them yet. We continue to probably have more questions. What's the economic impact of all these shutdowns going to be? How far reaching is this going to be? Is this going to be literally the entire United States, or is it just going to be the main city centers where we have super high population density? Questions like that are arising. And as we start to move into the quarterly report period, what are the actual financial results for even bigger companies? So still a lot of uncertainty out there. I think especially as it relates to New York City, as case counts there continue to rise. I mean, you can plot the US up against Italy's cases, you can plot New York City up against Italy's cases, and those curves end up matching pretty closely, putting us, in general in the United States around 10 days behind Italy still. So I think as we continue to see that, the concern continues to rise. And one of the questions around that, I think, is, what happens to the stock market if New York City ends up in, a situation like Wuhan was in China? I mean, Wall Street is in New York City. New York City has, I think, if they've got a front row seat to that, that's going to impact the markets even more so. I mean, we've talked about this for a while with Tesla, actually, where Tesla, has a higher penetration in California than it does in New York City. And I think that's probably, to some extent, limited the understanding of Tesla as a company in New York City versus probably funds that operate more heavily in California. And I think you can apply some of that same logic to how Wall Street will react to what's happening around this outbreak. So just something to consider in terms of the actual curve that we're on here and where this is all taking place and how specifically it's happening in New York City. Because again, New York City is now facing these lockdowns, and I think Wall Street, I think we're probably seeing the signs of that today, where Wall Street's really feeling those impacts at home. And I think that plays a huge factor in the markets. So I know this episode was a little bit rambly. I think that's most of my points here. I promise to get a little bit better at this throughout the week, but thank you guys for bearing with me. The schedule may be a little bit spotty. I just really am going to play it by ear, see how I'm feeling. I want to take this time for myself to recover. Of course, I'm isolating, so no one needs to worry about that. And yeah, I'll do my best to keep people updated with what's going on Twitter. So follow me there at Tesla Podcast. Make sure you're subscribed, and I will see you next time. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.